Daniel Mercer held his worn wallet against his chest, like a man holding something far more fragile than leather and fraying thread. The morning was cold the way December mornings always were in the city, the kind of cold that worked its way through a second-hand jacket and settled into your ribs and stayed there. He stood on the sidewalk outside the Alderton Grand Café, holding his 7-year-old daughter's hand with both of his, watching her look up at the glass facade with the expression children reserve for things they believe are magical. Lily had been asking about this place for 3 months. Not every day, and not with the kind of demanding repetition that wore a parent down. She asked the way she asked about everything she truly wanted. Quietly. Once in a while, as if she understood already that some things required patience, and so Daniel had saved. Not from any single paycheck, because no single paycheck ever left him with enough. He saved the way the poor learn to save, which is to say he shaved a few dollars from every week's grocery run, declined the coffee at the gas station twice a week, skipped the bus fare when his body could manage the walk. He had done this for 3 months, and now, the morning before his daughter's 8th birthday, he had enough. Enough for a small cake from the cafe's display case. Enough for 1 glass of warm milk, and he told himself, with the private conviction of a man who had learned to believe in small victories, that it was enough. Lily was 7 years, 364 days old that morning. She had her mother's eyes wide and dark and serious in the way that children's eyes are serious when they are paying close attention to the world. Her hair was in 2 lopsided braids, because Daniel had learned to braid from a video played on his phone propped against the bathroom faucet, and he was still learning. She wore her winter coat with the yellow buttons, one of which had been sewn back on crooked, and her small red backpack, the one she carried everywhere. The one that had a drawing of a rabbit on the front, that she had colored herself. She looked up at the glass building and said, in the particular tone of a child who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally found the moment to say it, "People in there are probably really happy, don't you think, Dad?" Daniel looked down at her. He felt the familiar compression in his chest that he had stopped trying to name because giving it a name made it too real. He squeezed her hand and said, "Yeah, bug. Probably." And then he pushed open the heavy glass door, and they walked in together. The world inside the Alderton Grand was constructed to communicate one thing immediately and efficiently: that you belonged, or that you didn't. The ceiling was high, and the light was warm and golden. The kind of light that made everything it touched look expensive. The furniture was dark wood and cream upholstery. The espresso machine behind the bar was Italian and gleaming, and appeared to have cost more than Daniel earned in 3 months of work. The smell was extraordinary roasted coffee and warm pastry and something floral, maybe a candle, maybe fresh flowers on the counter, maybe just the scent of money, which Daniel had sometimes thought had its own particular quality in rooms where it accumulated. He was 37 years old. He had worked as a dock loader, a delivery driver, an electrician's assistant, a furniture mover. He had repaired circuit panels in basements he wasn't supposed to be in, and hauled freight at 4 in the morning, and spent evenings driving routes so long that he sometimes pulled into the lot and sat in the dark for 10 minutes before he trusted himself to drive home. He had broad shoulders and calloused hands, and a face that had grown quieter in the years since his wife died. Not hard, because hardness would have required a kind of anger he had never felt, but quieter. Stille, the way water goes still after something passes through it. He was not a man who intimidated people, but he was a man who understood, at a glance, which rooms he belonged in, and which rooms would make him feel, without anyone saying a single word, that his presence was a kind of inconvenience. This was one of those rooms. He knew it before the first table of well-dressed strangers glanced over. He knew it before the young man at the host stand offered a smile that was perfectly professional and therefore entirely empty. He knew it the way you know certain things in your body before your mind has the chance to form the thought. But Lily had found the window table. She was already pointing to it, already pulling his hand, already saying, "Dad, look, you can see the whole street from here. You can see everything." And so he went. He sat across from his daughter at a table by the glass wall, while the city moved outside in its ordinary morning rush, and he told himself, "This is what you came for. This right here. The look, on her face. The menus arrived in leather folders. Daniel opened his and did the arithmetic with practiced speed, the way the poor always do in restaurants, not reading descriptions, not tasting anything in imagination, just scanning numbers, calculating, deciding before the waiter returned what could be ordered, without the walk home being filled with a different kind of cold, the cold that comes from having spent what you shouldn't have. He studied the numbers and made his calculation with a stillness he had mastered over years of masking this particular exercise, so that Lily would not see it and feel responsible. She was looking out the window and narrating what she saw, with the absorbed enthusiasm of a child who finds cities genuinely interesting. A man walking a dog, 2 pigeons on a ledge, a delivery truck reversing slowly, while a man in a yellow vest directed it. Daniel looked at the menu until the waiter came. He ordered a slice of the smallest cake on the display, the vanilla one with the white frosting, which Lily had pointed at immediately upon sitting down. He ordered a glass of whole milk. For himself, he asked, with perfect composure, for a cup of hot water. The waiter repeated it without expression, made a note, took the menus, and left. Lily didn't notice. She was watching the pigeons. In the corner closest to the window, at a table for 2 that she occupied alone, a woman sat with a single small espresso and an open notebook that she was not writing in. She was 36 years old and wore a dark charcoal coat that cost more than most people's rent. Her hair was dark and pulled back simply, and her face was the kind of face that read as composed to anyone who didn't know her well, which was nearly everyone. She was Evelyn Carter. She was the founder and chief executive of Carter Dynamics, a technology conglomerate with divisions in logistics, software, sustainable energy infrastructure, and medical data systems. She had been on the cover of 3 national business publications in the past 4 years. She had a chief of staff, a communications director, 2 personal assistants, and a security detail she had given the morning off because she had told no one she was coming here. She came to this cafe when she needed to disappear. Not from the world. She had never been the kind of person who wanted to disappear entirely, but from the particular version of herself that the world required her to perform. In public, Evelyn Carter was precise and controlled and deliberate. In this corner, with a notebook she wasn't writing in and a coffee she was only partially drinking, she was something quieter, something less finished. She had noticed the man and the little girl when they came in. She was someone who noticed things. It was not something she had been taught. It was something she had always done, a kind of low-level attentiveness that processed the room around her without effort. She saw the man check the prices. She saw him order the hot water. She saw him push his half of the small cake across the table toward his daughter when Lily reached for it a second time, claiming without words that he wasn't hungry, that he had already had enough of the part he had taken, even though the part he had taken was barely worth mentioning. Evelyn watched this small gesture, the quiet slide of a plate across a table, and felt something shift in her chest with a fineness she wasn't prepared for. What happened next was ordinary, in the way that the most important moments often are. Lily reached for her backpack to pull out the little sketchbook she carried everywhere, and the backpack slipped from the chair and landed on the floor with a soft thump. From the front pocket, which she had not fully zipped, a folded piece of paper slid out and traveled, with the gentle drift of paper on smooth flooring, to a stop just at the edge of the next table. Evelyn leaned down and picked it up before she had decided to. It was folded into quarters, the paper soft with many refoldings, worn at the creases. She glanced at Lily, who had not noticed, who was checking the sketchbook for damage with great seriousness. She looked at the paper in her hand and saw at the top, in a child's careful handwriting, the words, "Dear Mommy." She should have set it down on the table and said nothing. She was not entirely sure why she didn't. Maybe it was the handwriting so careful, so deliberate. Each letter made with the conscientiousness of a child who wanted to get something right. Maybe it was the word Mommy, which carried inside it a whole particular quality of longing that only certain words can hold. She read it. She read the whole thing. And she stood very still after she was done. The letter was not long. It was written on lined notebook paper and pencil, and it began the way children begin things, with the most important thing first, stated plainly, without preamble. Lily had written that she knew her dad said he was already full at dinner, but that she knew he wasn't because she had watched him put his fork down when he thought she wasn't looking, and she had counted, and he only ever took about 4 bites. She wrote that her dad slept on the couch so she could have the warm blanket, and that she had gotten up one night to put his jacket over him, and he hadn't woken up, and she hoped that was okay. She wrote that she wished he would smile more, not the smile he did when she was watching. She could tell the difference between those two smiles. She was 7, and she wasn't a baby. She wrote that if Mommy were still here, Mommy would probably hug Dad right now because he looked like he needed it. And then she wrote, in the last line, the one that stayed in Evelyn's mind, long after she had folded the paper and set it back on the table with careful hands. I just want Dad to have a quiet house someday, and not have to work at night anymore. Evelyn Carter had negotiated acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She had stood at podiums and spoken to rooms full of people who wanted things from her, and given them nothing they hadn't earned. She had learned, over many years, and through a number of experiences she thought of as necessary rather than painful, how to keep her face still, and her voice level, and her hands steady, when everything inside her was doing something else entirely. She did all of that now, but she sat very still for a moment, with the city going on outside the window, and the soft noise of the cafe around her, and felt something move through her that she didn't have a ready name for. It was not pity. She was almost certain of that. It was something else. Something that felt more like recognition. She folded the letter back along its original creases and walked to their table. She excused herself quietly and explained that the paper had slipped out, that she had noticed it, and she said this with the directness she defaulted to when other approaches felt insufficient, that she had read it, not intentionally, and that she was sorry for that. Daniel looked at the letter she placed on the table between them, and then looked at his daughter, who had still not fully understood what was happening. And then he looked at the woman standing beside their table and said, with the polite reserve of a man who has had to maintain dignity in too many situations where dignity required effort, "It's all right." It wasn't all right, not entirely, but he said it because Lily was there, and Lily was watching him. Evelyn asked if she might sit for a moment. Daniel looked at his daughter again, and Lily, with the uncomplicated openness of a child who had not yet learned to be guarded around strangers who seemed kind, said yes before her father could answer either way. What followed was not the kind of conversation that announces itself as significant. It was quiet and a little awkward at the edges, the way conversations between strangers always are when they begin somewhere unexpectedly personal. Evelyn said she was sorry about the letter, again. Daniel said it was fine, again, but this time with something that approached sincerity. Lily asked Evelyn if she liked pigeons, because there were 2 outside who seemed to be having an argument, and this broke the awkwardness somewhat. Evelyn said she had never given pigeons much thought, but that she appreciated their commitment. Lily said she thought the one on the left was probably winning. Daniel watched his daughter charm a stranger without trying, and felt the specific kind of love that has no clean emotion attached to it. It was too large and too complicated for a single name. Evelyn asked, after Lily had returned to watching the street, how long they had been coming here. Daniel said this was the first time. And then, because the letter was there between them on the table, and it had made a kind of honesty available that wouldn't otherwise have been, he said more than he had planned to. He told her that Lily had been asking about this place for months, that it was her birthday tomorrow, that this was the best he could do this month. He said, the last part without apology, matter-of-factly, the way a man says something he has made peace with, even when peace is not the whole of what he feels. Evelyn listened. She was very good at listening in the way that powerful people sometimes are fully present, not composing her next sentence while you spoke, not performing attention. She was just listening, and then she asked, "What did you do before the dock work?" The question surprised him. Most people did not ask what came before, he told her. He said he had been a mechanical engineer, that he had worked for a mid-sized firm doing systems, design industrial equipment, logistics infrastructure, the kind of work that required careful thinking and a tolerance for problems that didn't resolve quickly. He had been good at it. He had worked there for 6 years. And then the company had gone through a restructuring, which was the word companies used when they decided that certain salaries were liabilities, and he had been among the first to go. 2 months after that, his wife had become seriously ill. The illness had required treatments that their insurance covered partially, and their savings covered the rest of. And by the time she died, there was nothing left of what they had built together except the apartment lease and the car and Lily. He said all of this in the same measured tone, the voice of a man who has told the story enough times in his own head that the words have become worn smooth, manageable, something he can carry without it showing. Evelyn said, "I'm sorry." And then, after a moment, "Do you ever miss it? The engineering work?" Daniel looked at his daughter and said, "Every day, but I'm not sure I miss it more than I'm afraid I can't get back to it." He paused. "I don't want her to think her dad gave up." Evelyn looked at him for a moment, with an expression that Daniel didn't know how to read, which was unusual, because he was generally quite good at reading people. Then she stood and said it had been very nice to meet them. She looked at Lily and said happy early birthday. Lily said thank you and asked if she thought the pigeon on the left had won. Evelyn said she was fairly certain he had. Then she left the table, returned to her corner, put the unfinished notebook in her bag, and left the cafe. At the door, she paused for a moment without turning around. Then she pushed through the glass and was gone. Daniel looked at the space she had left. He looked at his daughter, who had gone back to drawing in her sketchbook a picture of two pigeons. He could see from across the table, one of them larger than the other, the larger one clearly triumphant. He gathered their things slowly. He left a tip that he would feel by Thursday, and he walked his daughter out into the cold. He didn't look back at the table. He rarely looked back at things. Evelyn Carter was in her office by noon. She canceled 2 meetings that she could cancel and sat behind the glass wall of the room on the 41st floor with a view of the city that she had long since stopped seeing the way people with views of cities eventually stop seeing them. She sat with her hands folded on the desk for a few minutes, which was not something she did. She was not someone who sat still without purpose. She had built everything she had built by moving forward through obstacles, with a steadiness that people who worked for her described, when they described her at all, as remarkable, not cold, but very deliberate, very much in possession of herself. She had not always been. She had grown up in a household where money was counted carefully, where her mother worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood, and her father had driven a delivery truck until his back gave out and then driven it anyway, because there was no alternative. She did not talk about this publicly. She had not hidden it, exactly, but she had put it in a different room of herself, a room she passed by but did not often enter. The letter she had read in the cafe had opened that door without asking permission. She sat at her desk and thought about her mother, who had kept a small notebook in her apron pocket, where she tracked every dollar that went in or out of the household, who had made the grocery run on Tuesday mornings, because Tuesday was when the marked-down items were restocked, who had told Evelyn when Evelyn was 9 years old, "The only thing nobody can take from you is what you know how to do." She had carried that. She had built on it. And somewhere in the building of it, she had stopped being sure, most days, whether the people around her saw her or saw the company she had become synonymous with. She had her chief of staff, Marcus, at her desk within 20 minutes. She gave him a name, Daniel Mercer, and a brief description, and asked him to find whatever was findable. The public record, work history, professional references, previous employment. She wanted to know if the man was as capable as he presented himself to be. Marcus, who had worked for her for 8 years and had learned not to ask certain questions, said he would have it by end of day. She told him one other thing. Whatever she decided to do with the information, if she decided to do anything, she did not want Daniel Mercer to know her involvement until she was certain it was right to tell him. Marcus looked at her for just a moment longer than the moment required. And then he said, "Yes. Understood." The results came back that evening. Marcus set the folder on her desk and summarized. Daniel Mercer had been a senior systems engineer at Halcourt Industrial. His work record was clean, and by the assessments of former colleagues Marcus had managed to reach, more than clean 2 of them had used the word exceptional without prompting. There had been a patent application, years ago, for a logistics routing system he had developed. The patent had lapsed after his wife's illness, unfiled, because the filing fees had become a luxury he couldn't afford. His certifications had expired, but were renewable. There were no red flags, no dishonesty, no gaps in character that Marcus had found. He was exactly what he had seemed to be across a table in a cafe. A capable man going through a duration that capable men sometimes have to go through quietly, without anyone watching. Evelyn closed the folder. She looked out the window at the city she had spent 15 years building something inside of. And she thought about a child's letter written in pencil on notebook paper, worn at the creases from many foldings, kept in the front pocket of a small red backpack with a rabbit on it that the child had colored herself. She thought about the sentence, "I just want Dad to have a quiet house someday, and not have to work at night anymore." She picked up her phone and called Marcus back. She told him to send an interview invitation to Daniel Mercer, that they had an opening in infrastructure systems development that had been posted for 2 months without a suitable candidate, and that she thought it was worth exploring. She told him to route it through the standard HR process, to make sure no one on the hiring panel knew her interest in the outcome, and to ensure the invitation read as a standard recruitment contact. She thought about this for a moment after she hung up. She was not a woman who acted on impulse. She had spent a long time learning not to. But she also had known since her mid-20s, when her company had been 2 people in a rented office, and she had made a series of decisions that had looked like risks and turned out to be correct, how to distinguish between an impulse and a certainty. This felt like the second kind. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Daniel read it 3 times, standing in the parking lot of the freight depot before he believed it. Carter Dynamics was one of those names that existed in a different category of the city's economy, the kind of company whose name appeared on the sides of buildings and in the business pages, and that was referenced casually by people who worked in offices as a benchmark for success. The kind of name that people like Daniel knew the way people who live near mountains know them. Present, enormous, categorically, not something you interact with personally. He thought at first it was a mistake. He checked the email address, checked the job title, checked the company name 3 more times. Then he called the number listed and was connected to a human resources coordinator who confirmed his name, confirmed the position, confirmed the interview date, and thanked him for his interest in Carter Dynamics in a tone that suggested she fielded these calls routinely and that his surprise registered to her as unremarkable. He stood in the parking lot for another minute after hanging up. Then he called his neighbor, Mrs. Huang, who watched Lily on the evenings he worked late, and asked if she could take Lily to school on Thursday morning, because he had somewhere to be. That evening, he opened the closet in the bedroom and found the suit. It was his only suit. He had bought it for a job interview 11 years ago and worn it twice since, once to a friend's wedding and once to his wife's funeral. He laid it on the bed and examined it with the particular attention of a man auditing an asset he has not thought about in a long time. The jacket was slightly large across the shoulders now he had filled out more in the years of physical work. The trousers were fine. The tie was dark blue, and still in the shape it had been left in, folded over the hanger with the careful imprecision of someone who had once been taught how to store a tie properly and had half retained the lesson. He ironed the shirt in the kitchen with the iron that had a leak on the steam setting and had to be held at an angle. He shined the shoes with a cloth, and then Lily came out of the bathroom in her pajamas and found him standing in the kitchen with the ironed shirt and the blue tie and the serious expression he wore when he was concentrating, and she said, "Is that your interview suit?" He told her it was. She asked if she could fix his tie. He said, of course. She stood on the step stool they kept in the kitchen for her to reach the high shelf, and she adjusted the tie with great seriousness, her small hands working the knot with more confidence than he would have expected. And she said, "You're going to be great, Dad." He looked at her. He felt the thing in his chest that had no name larger this time, more complex, threaded through with something that was almost hope and that he handled very carefully, the way you handle something fragile that you are not yet sure can hold its own weight. Carter Dynamics occupied the top 14 floors of a building downtown that Daniel had walked past many times and looked at from the outside, the way you look at certain things you have categorized as not for you. The lobby alone was enough to make him pause. High ceilings, geometric art installations, a receptionist behind a desk that was probably custom built. He gave his name. He was given a visitor badge and directed to an elevator. He rode it to the 38th floor and was met by a coordinator who walked him to a conference room with a long table and a panel of 3 people who introduced themselves with the smooth efficiency of people who interviewed candidates frequently. He sat across from them and answered their questions with the precision that his years of engineering training had never fully vacated from his thinking, even when the thinking had been redirected toward doc manifests and delivery routes. He was asked about systems design, about problem-solving methodology, about experience with logistics infrastructure. He answered well. He could feel himself answering well, which was a sensation he had almost forgotten, the specific satisfaction of being asked about something you actually know and being able to give it fully, without having to manage an impression or perform a competence you don't quite have. He was in the middle of an explanation of how he had once redesigned a routing system for a warehouse client that had reduced their processing time by nearly a third when a monitor at the far end of the room flickered and died. The projector linked to it lost its input signal. The senior manager at the head of the table frowned and pressed a button and nothing happened. Daniel said, quietly, "May I?" The manager looked at him. Daniel said he thought it was a signal interrupt, probably the HDMI handshake dropping. He stood and went to the panel at the side of the wall. He traced the cable routing, checked the connections, identified the issue, a loose junction in the cable management housing, the kind of thing that happened in conference rooms where the cables were routed through wall panels and subjected to the vibrations of the building, and reconnected it. The monitor came back on. The manager looked at him with an expression that had shifted slightly. The other 2 members of the panel looked at each other. Daniel returned to his seat and said, "Sorry for the interruption." The interview continued. At the end of it, one of the panel members, a woman named Roberts, who had said little during the interview itself, asked if he had anything to add. He thought for a moment. He said, "I understand my background has some gaps. The certifications have lapsed. I've been doing other things. But I know the work, and I'm not someone who walks away from something when it gets hard. I just need someone to give me the room to show that." He looked at the 3 faces across from him and said, "With the exact amount of composure required, and not 1 ounce more. I only need 1 chance to prove I haven't given up." There was a pause. Then Roberts said they would be in touch. Daniel rode the elevator back down. He walked through the lobby. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the December cold and waited for his body to decide how it felt. His phone rang 11 minutes later. It was the HR coordinator. The panel had made a recommendation. The position was his, pending background check and reference confirmation, with a start date 2 weeks out. He stood on the sidewalk and said thank you. He said he would confirm in writing. He hung up and stood there another moment. Then he walked to the bakery on the next block and bought a small pastry, the kind Lily liked, with the powdered sugar on top, and he ate half of it on the sidewalk in the cold, and for the first time in longer than he could remember clearly, he smiled without thinking about whether it was the kind of smile anyone needed to see. He had been at Carter Dynamics for 3 weeks when the patterns started accumulating into something he couldn't quite account for. Colleagues mentioned the CEO with a particular quality of reference, not reverence exactly, but a kind of respect that had something personal in it, as if they were describing someone they had seen act rightly under pressure and had not forgotten it. He heard her name in passing, Carter, Evelyn Carter. He saw a portrait in the lobby that he had not stopped to look at on the day of the interview, hurrying through with his visitor badge and his nerves. He stopped to look at it now. He stood in front of it for a moment. He knew the face. He knew it from a table by the window in a cafe, from a conversation about pigeons and quiet houses and the work that a man was afraid to go back to. He stood there for a longer moment, and then he walked to his desk and sat down and thought about this for the rest of the afternoon, without arriving anywhere useful. Lily, that weekend, made a drawing. She made it at the kitchen table with her colored pencils, working with the absorption she brought to things she cared about. When she was done, she held it up and said, "It's for the lady from the cafe." It was a drawing of a cafe recognizable mostly by the large windows she had drawn, which she had filled in with blue lines to suggest glass. Inside the windows, she had drawn 3 figures: a tall, thin one, a slightly smaller one, and a small one with lopsided braids. Above them she had written, in her careful pencil handwriting, "Thank you for talking to us." Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. He put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. He looked at it while he made dinner. He thought about what it meant that his daughter, at 7 years old, had understood something that he was still working through himself, that some encounters mattered enough to be recorded. He was called up to the 41st floor on a Thursday afternoon. The message came from the executive suite. The CEO would like a brief check-in with newer members of the engineering team. This was presented as routine. He took the elevator and was directed through a set of glass doors by an assistant who smiled with the contained warmth of someone who had been briefed to put people at ease. The office was large and high-windowed, with the city spread beyond the glass in a way that reminded him of something he couldn't place immediately and then could: the window table at the Alderton Grand, and Lily saying that people in there were probably really happy. He walked in. Evelyn Carter stood up from behind her desk, and Daniel stopped walking. The recognition was immediate and absolute. He looked at her face, composed, as it had been in the cafe, precise, as it had always been, but also watching him with something that was not quite the expression of a CEO greeting a new employee. He stood there and understood. Not all of it at once, but enough. He understood the timing of the interview email. He understood the panel that had recommended him so quickly. He understood the morning in the cafe and the conversation, and the woman who had listened with such complete attention and then left without explanation. He stood in the middle of the office, and the first thing he felt was not gratitude. The first thing he felt was the particular sting of a man who has learned to protect his dignity and who suddenly cannot be certain whose hands it has been in. He said, with a control he was grateful for, "You were the one behind this." It was not a question. Evelyn said, "Yes." He said quietly, "Was any of it real? The interview? The panel? Or was it already decided?" She said, "The interview was real. I told no one on the panel what I knew about you. The decision was theirs." He looked at her. He said, "Then why tell me now?" She said, "Because I think you deserve to know how something started, even if what matters more is how it continues." He looked away, toward the window, toward the city that went on indifferently in the cold outside. He said, more quietly, "I don't want to be a charity case." Evelyn said, "I know, that's not what this is." He looked back at her. She said, "I read a letter that a child wrote to her dead mother. In that letter, she described a man who eats 4 bites of dinner and says he's full, and sleeps on the couch in the cold so his daughter has the warm blanket, and who has never, in all of it, stopped being someone worth believing in. I didn't give you anything you didn't earn. I just made sure the room was open." Daniel stood there. He thought about Lily at the kitchen table with her colored pencils. He thought about the drawing on the refrigerator, 3 figures by a window. A city implied by blue lines, the careful handwriting of a child who knew how to say thank you for the right things. He felt something in his chest that had been held very tightly for a very long time begin, with great care and slowness, to loosen. He did not cry. He was not, in general, a man who cried easily, but his face changed in a way that Evelyn, who was watching it carefully, understood. He said, finally, "She's a good kid," Evelyn said. "I know, I could tell." He nodded once, the way men nod when words have been used to their limit. Then Evelyn reached into the desk drawer and set a folder on the surface between them. She said, "There's a senior systems development role opening in the new quarter. It's the position the team should have been building toward. If you want it, the pathway is yours on merit, same as everything else. And there's a scholarship program we fund through the Carter Foundation for children of employees." Lily would qualify. Daniel looked at the folder. He did not touch it yet. He said, "Why? Not why the job, not why the scholarship, just why," as if he wanted the whole of it explained. Evelyn said, "Because the last time someone believed in me without wanting something from me, it changed what I thought was possible, and I've been trying to figure out what to do with that for a long time." He looked at her. He picked up the folder. The months that followed were the kind of months that don't announce their importance while they're happening. Daniel moved through them the way a man moves through a recovery, not dramatically, not with the sudden transformation of someone in a story who changes all at once, but with the accumulative, steady quality of someone regaining a strength that was always theirs, one day and then the next. He certified in the systems that had updated since his time away from the field. He took on the harder problems in the engineering team with the careful methodicalness that his colleagues came to recognize and rely on. He was not flashy about any of it. He did not need to be. The work was enough. The work was, for the first time in years, exactly enough. He was the kind of man who improved things without drawing attention to having improved them, who would notice that a process was inefficient, adjust it quietly, and mention the adjustment only when someone asked where the extra hour in the schedule had come from. His team lead, a woman named Patricia, who had been skeptical of him in the beginning, in the particular way that engineers are skeptical of people who arrive mid-project and claim prior expertise, stopped being skeptical by the end of the second month and started consulting him on the problems she hadn't been able to move past. He liked this. He liked being useful in the way that used the whole of what he knew. He had forgotten, in the years of the dock and the delivery routes and the electrician work, what it felt like to be used well. The remembering was not triumphant. It was quiet and solid, like coming back to a room you had thought was closed and finding it open after all. Lily started at a new school in the spring, a good school, a school that had a music program and a proper art class and a library that she described in sustained and loving detail on the walk home every afternoon. She made friends. She had a teacher, a woman named Miss Aldridge, who noticed that Lily had a particular gift for storytelling and who gave her a journal with a red cover and told her to fill it. She did. She filled it with the faithful diligence of a child who has been handed exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Evelyn Carter made changes of her own, more quietly. Her assistant Marcus, who noticed most things, noticed that she had begun taking lunch outside the office, at least twice a week, that she occasionally left at a reasonable hour, instead of the hour that was functionally indistinguishable from night, that she had started reading things that were not industry reports or acquisition documents, novels, sometimes, and once a slim collection of poetry that she left on the edge of her desk for 3 days before putting it in her bag. She began to have dinner with Daniel and Lily on Thursday evenings, which had started because Daniel had brought Lily to the office once, when his usual arrangement fell through, and Lily had been characteristically direct about inviting Evelyn to eat with them. Evelyn had said yes before she had decided to, which she recognized afterward as rare. The dinners were at the apartment, which was still small, and still showed the evidence of years lived carefully on not quite enough, but which was warm and smelled like whatever Daniel was cooking, and had Lily's drawings on every surface. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and watched a 7-year-old explain the taxonomy of pigeons with the authority of a naturalist, and she ate food made by someone who cooked with the kind of attention that people who feed someone they love cook with, and she felt the particular quality of ease that comes from being in a place where you are not required to be anything other than what you actually are. There was something she had not expected in these evenings. Something she had not planned for when she had told Marcus to look into a man's name in the middle of a December workday. She had expected to feel the satisfaction of having done a right thing. She had not expected to feel, with increasing frequency, that these Thursday evenings were the part of her week she moved toward. She did not say this out loud. She was still, in many ways, someone who held things carefully before letting them be real, but she noticed it, and noticing it, she did not pull back from it. She let it be what it was, the way you let certain things be what they are when you have finally learned that not everything requires your management. Winter came back around. A year had moved through them all and left its marks the way years do, some things heavier, some things lighter, some things that had been knotted slowly, carefully loosening. On the night before Lily's 9th birthday, Daniel drove the three of them back to the Alderton Grand. He had made a reservation this time. He had a different jacket, a good one, charcoal wool, bought from a shop he had walked past for years without going into, bought without looking at the price tag first, which was a new experience that he was still getting used to. The parking was easier because he had a different car. These were facts without drama, simple changes that had accumulated the way simple changes do, unremarkably. And then all at once, Lily sat in the back seat and pressed her face against the window as they approached and said, "I remember this." Daniel said he remembered it too. Evelyn, in the passenger seat, said nothing, but she was smiling in the way she smiled when she was not trying to smaller than her public smile, more real, the kind that appeared before she had decided to allow it. Inside, the room was the same, the warm golden light, the gleaming Italian espresso machine, the cream upholstery. The host showed them to the window table without Daniel asking for it. Lily slid into her seat and immediately looked out at the city the way she had the first time, with the same focused pleasure, as if the city were a thing that rewarded watching. Daniel opened the menu. He looked at it the way a person looks at a menu when they are reading the descriptions instead of calculating the numbers. He ordered the lamb chops, which were expensive and which he had been thinking about since he saw them listed outside the week before. He ordered Lily the pancakes with the caramelized pears that she had been discussing in the car, with the intensity of someone who has done advanced research. He ordered Evelyn the wine she had mentioned once in passing that she liked, which he had remembered and had looked up to ensure he was remembering correctly. Lily looked at the city outside for a long moment, and then looked at her father and asked, with the plain-spoken directness that had always been her particular gift, the question that had been in the room with them for a year without quite being spoken. "Dad, do you still feel like you failed?" Daniel set down his menu. He looked at his daughter, who was watching him with her mother's eyes wide and dark and serious and entirely present. He looked at Evelyn, who was watching him too, without the composure she sometimes wore like armor, just watching. He looked at the city outside the glass, the city that had pressed against him for years with its weight and its indifference and its occasional, surprising, fierce grace. He said, "No, because I finally understand something." He looked back at his daughter. The richest thing a person can have isn't money. It's someone who still believes in you when you can barely believe in yourself. Lily considered this with the seriousness she gave to things she was adding to her permanent understanding of the world. Then she said, "I always believed in you, Dad." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything. Some things said themselves. Outside the glass, the city was doing what it always did in December, moving through its cold evening with purpose, all the lights coming on at once the way they did at this hour, as if the darkness were a signal the city had been waiting for, to show what it was made of. 3 people sat at a table by a window. They were not a family, the way families typically assemble themselves, not by blood or law or any document. They were a family, the way certain things become what they are, gradually, quietly, without announcement, until one day you look around and realize that the shape of your life has changed and that you would not change it back. The city spread out beyond the glass and glowed. It asked nothing of them. They asked nothing of it. They simply sat in the warmth of a room that had once seemed to belong to someone else entirely. And they had dinner. And they were not, any of them, alone anymore. There is a particular kind of grace that does not announce itself, that arrives not in the form of rescue or reversal, but in the form of a table by a window. A child's laughter, the small and ordinary fact of being known. Daniel Mercer had not been looking for grace when he walked into the Alderton Grand that first morning with his worn wallet and his daughter's hand in his and the cold December city at his back. He had been looking for a window table. He had been looking for a birthday. He had found, without knowing it, the beginning of the rest of his life. And Lily, who would grow up and write about all of it years later in a book she would dedicate to her father, with a second dedication to a woman who taught her that kindness was not weakness but its own quiet form of strength. Lily had known, with the complete and undefended certainty of a child who has been loved well even through the hard years, that this was always how the story was going to go. She had just been waiting for the rest of them to catch up.